the session is being now recorded, and now we will switch to English. And I would like, first of all, to welcome you to this strategic design seminars in this course of PhD design at UNIDCOM. And I will say that it's like a great pleasure to have you here with a fantastic group of speakers like you, Mauricy. And we are talking about incorporating design in business practices. That is the topic of this module. Mm-hmm. And we would like to build knowledge by sharing views and experience and discussing future research areas. That is something that is very important for our students. And your presentation will last 60 minutes, as we discussed, and then we will take questions from the audience for about 30 minutes. Okay. And I really hope that we will have like a very rewarding learning experience. And I will, maybe now it's time to hand over the session to you. And have a good time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rui. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join, to share this content that's very interesting. One small note is that I'm really bad timekeeper. So I will try my best to keep in time. It might be shorter, it might be a bit longer, God knows, we will see.
Don't worry.
The other topic that I wanted to mention also is that in the end of the presentation, you already know, but for the audience, is that I want to close with a small pinch on how we can use also design as research. Because actually, just to contextualize for the audience, that we actually ended up with this topic because I was talking to you about the use of practice-based design research and methods, and how to operationalize that. And so I thought that this little link in the end could actually be useful.
It's great.
Yeah. But yeah, let's start, because again, I'm not a good timekeeper. And also, just another point is that it's really good just to speak a little bit of Portuguese. My wife is, I speak to her in English as well, so it's, take the opportunities. Good evening, everybody. So I'll be talking about design thinking for service and business innovation. I could see by the profile who shared with me. I assume that some of you already have some experience with it. And hopefully this will be a slightly different perspective. I want to talk about the academic roots of design thinking and a bit of service design, how I see the application of design thinking, and again, as I said, the use of design for research. Let me see here. Okay, so design is one of those complicated things. I actually come from service design. I did my PhD in service design, and it's double complicated because, like, to explain what service is a small uphill battle. To explain what design is just like it's a impossible endeavor. But I would like to start with this view of Nigel Cross, that of design as a discipline. That is the third liberal art. So, let's say that in the big fields of knowledge, you can say that there is sciences, which is concerned with the natural world, right? And humanities, which is the human aspects, the human interactions. And design is the third one, and I will talk a little bit later, that is concerned with the artificial artifacts. And artifacts, not only tangible, but also processes. So if you think about business, for example, business is by nature an artificial artifact. In this way, each of those three liberal arts, humanities, sciences, and design, have their own phenomena of interest, their methods, and cultural values. The central concern of design is the conception and realization of new things. When I talk later about research, it will make more sense. But when we talk about design and design in research, we are not trying to understand how things are, but how things could be. There is the problem, of course, with the word design. It has far too many usages as a noun, as a verb, as an adjective. So, but at the core, I'm taking this idea that to design, to create something new, that is, well, the main concern of the discipline. And so if you try to understand this realization that there is this balance between what design is, and there was a movement of trying to create a method and understanding a scientification, let's say, of design in the early days. So, but design really emerged when we started to split in the Industrial Revolution. Who, well, designs, who conceives and plans the product, and who will build it. This separation is quite essential for the emergence of design as a profession or as a practice. And well, it has evolved over the years. You can see that, well, it started with industrial products. It expanded over digital interactions, services. Now we are talking about design of businesses. Design of experiences is quite taken as well. So as I said, after the World War II, this desire, so there was a big momentum. Try to understand the zeitgeist of what was happening there. You had this massive war that was, let's say, won by technology, right? By scientific progress. And there was a great enthusiasm of scientificizing, if this word even exists, everything. We want to get people to think in scientific ways and want things to be scientific. So there was a belief that the design process could be fully cataloged, described, and rationalized. I took this sentence from this text here, which is NS-Pulse N+1 Mag, and I strongly advise it. Really talks about this story, about this effort to make this methodological, systematized view of design, and how it ultimately failed. So there was this big seminar in 1967, and all the big names, John Chris Jones, Alexander, I forgot the name of the others, but the people that were really working with this idea of systematic design, there was already quite some research going on, and people were really trying to essentially create a framework, a process. You know, they really believe that design could be, well, organized and systematized. What happened is that at some point, Hittel introduced this concept of wicked problem. So essentially what he did is that he said, okay, we should not really think about design as concerned with methods and processes, but about a specific class of problems. Problems that are often a consequence of the artificial world, and because the systems we create tend to be very complex and fuzzy, and well, they end up creating situations. And the problems are not wicked because they're unethical or evil, but because they are really hard to cope. You can really never reduce it to a very fair description, let's say this way. Sorry, I lost. Yeah, this one here, it's a bit out of order. But so this is the definition from Buchanan that always works with the understanding of wicked problems. But the idea is that you cannot really formulate what it is. There is no stopping rule. There is no really optimal solution. So this is not something that you can really reduce to like an engineering problem and optimize, which was what the people were really trying to do. You can only see if it's good or bad, if it kind of works or not. This is the class of problems that are really big social issues, but sometimes you can see, of course, smaller. But word hunger or violence, terrorism, you know, the more you dig, the more complex these problems come. And very often, it's very difficult to separate what is a problem, what is a cause, what is a consequence, because they are so tangled in so many other things that is really difficult. That's why you can never really optimize the solutions. Herbert Simon talks about the science of artificial, which is this idea of devised course of actions aimed at changing this situation into preferred ones. So the idea is that everyone that designs, I'm sorry, just, okay, yeah. It's like I'm missing some slide here. I'm not sure if I change the order, but okay. These are artificial problems, right? I mean, like world hunger is a problem because, well, the distribution systems tend not to address. So if we try to break up those wicked problems, we will really have an issue on, let's say, finding the root cause. And I will talk later about ways of coping with this. But the idea is that design is really handling artificial problems. And the idea is that people trying to cope with those problems are essentially designing. So everyone designers will devise a course of making the situation better. So essentially, people are constantly designing, especially professionals. And that is the perspective that Donald Schoen takes. He approaches the design theory from a perspective of constructivism. And similar to Simon, he sees that it's about the professional. Simon, who actually got a Nobel Prize, well, in the studies that kind of led to this understanding, how can I explain that? He says that a medicine doctor is to a degree designing in action because he's trying to cope with the practices or the application of the professions. Businesses are trying to design in action. And that's exactly the word that Sean essentially is using, which is this action and reflection that you do when you are doing your job. So essentially, when the practitioner has a problem that cannot really lead to a solution, he's trying to actually understand what's going on and reframe this situation. So design thinking essentially comes to be the application or like a understanding of how we can cope with these ill-defined problems in the artificial world and how we can start to really reframe this contexts in a way that we can actually find solutions for those this specific class of problems, the wicked problems. So design thinking, in the words of Cross, involves the abilities of resolving ill-defined problems, wicked problems, adopting solution-focused cognitive strategies, reframing the problem to actually understand through practice, which has to do with the abductive and oppositional thinking, and the use of nonverbal media modeling. Essentially, you can sketch, you can use tangible or quasi-tangibles like a drawing artifact to facilitate your thinking. So instead of really taking the problem as is, because this will not work with wicked problems, you try to shape these problems and rotate it, like find a new understanding that can lead to a better situation. As like you are trying to improve the situation, you cannot create an optimal situation because sort of you cannot really define what the optimal situation is. So at the core of design thinking, you really have this idea of abductive thinking, these oppositional ways of really creating creative leaps. So for those, designing problems are paradoxes made up of conflicting situations in which the solutions emerges in the process of solving the paradoxes and where the challenge is figured out what to create while there is no agreed solution. What really is it that we are coping with? Like if we are trying to sort out world hunger, what is the actual problem? Because world hunger in many aspects is essentially a symptom of a defective system because there is more than enough production of food worldwide. If you're trying to cope with this problem, you can try to, let's say, tackle waste in the farming, waste in the transportation, the matrix of food people eat that produces a lot of meat that is essentially eating grains that humans could be eating. So in the way, what you really have to do is to kind of, what is the objective, but you don't really know much better. So a way of explaining this is if we compare with the traditional, sorry, that's okay, yeah, sorry, I'm just getting confused. I just made the presentation, I didn't study it a lot. So if we compare, let's say, the most common one, which is deduction, right? So we really know what you're talking about and we know the rules of the game. Things about mathematics or predicting something. We know what we are talking about, we know how it works, but we are trying to calculate, let's say this way, the outcome. In induction, we know what we are talking about, and we can actually see the results. And then we are creating hypotheses to try to understand how it works. Very common in social sciences, right? We do those experiments to try to understand how people buy more wine. You can say, okay, I have the hypothesis if we play French music in the supermarket, more people will buy more wine. Actually, it happens. And then you can actually see the results, and then you can create and test your hypothesis. The other way of thinking is, okay, I know how things works, and I know the outcome that I want to achieve, but I don't really know what is it that I have to do. So I want to reduce violence in a neighborhood that has a lot of clubs, right? And I can assume that, well, if I put a lot of police there, or if I increase the amount of watchers, these will lead to reduced violence. And then what have to I do? So should I put more police? Should I train the bouncers of the clubs around to do it? What is it that I should do to actually increase these watchers in this area to create the value of less violence? But if you're talking about design approach, you really don't know what or how. And that's why you have to frame. You say, okay, I want to reduce violence in this area. So one example that a consultancy, if I'm not wrong, in Australia did is, well, we can actually take the analogy of a festival. Why do we have violence in this neighborhood, but we don't have in a festival where the situation is not very different, right? We have a bunch of young, drunk kids, overly excited, so a bunch of them on drugs. What should we do? And then you can try to say, okay, is the idea of framing this analogy of a festival worth it? And then you say, okay, let's take this risk. Okay, it sounds logic. And then you say, okay, what can we do from this to help create more of these festival settings? So as you understand that in festivals, people have a large area where they can chill, right? They can come and go when they want, which is not really the case of this area, because at some point there is no more transportation and people have to stay until much later. And then what they end up doing is drinking more than they actually want, and just out of boredom until the next transportation is there. People are often very confrontational. I mean, I think you might remember when you were younger, very often the bouncer is creating its own demand because they're so violent that people get annoyed, and then you have all this spiral of violence. So they try to create a system where people would be there to help inform the people in the area where to go, like people with like bright colors, helping the let's say the audience navigate the neighborhood. There would be easier way for transportation, and also an area where people could just sit and chill. So you think about all those things that implement this analogy, you know, like how we bring this neighborhood towards this festival style, and this will help us create. But this is just one of the many ideas that could actually have helped create this situation, right? But then as you introduce this analogy, you frame the problem, and that's essentially what you can actually do. And I can give the example that happened to me, which was on my thesis. I had to try to create brand-driven experiences. This is the value that I want to create. And then I want to understand how. How can I do that? And it's like, okay, I did a very broad research, and I understand, okay, from all those aspects, if I try to infuse the design process with information about the brand, they will embed this brand into the interactions that create the customer experience. And then I actually create the artifact that helps this process to achieve this outcome. And this is let's say a designerly way of thinking at its root, right? Because we know a lot about design thinking as we talk today, which is this outcome from this IDEO Tim Brown perspective. But as its root, it is really about reframing the problem, understand the situation, acknowledging the complexity of the problems that you are trying to address, which has to do with this indeterminacy of wicked problems. So in the words of Buchanan, actually not in the words of Buchanan, but building on the word of Buchanan, abduction is about changing the problem placement, reframing the situation in a way that makes it easier for us to sort out the problem. Another example that came to mind now is when I was younger, I had a teacher and she was talking about, I want an oil that I can fry food and that I can just throw it out. You know, we cannot just throw out oil. It's environmentally terrible. And then, okay, that's an interesting perspective. It would be a very cool innovation, possibly. But then if you actually change the problem and you say, well, what you're trying here is not oil. Oil is not the problem. The problem is frying. And then you say, okay, frying is an easier problem to sort out than to create an oil that can be flushed without environmental impact, because I actually think that chemically speaking is essentially impossible. So then you can actually have the air fryer, which fries without generating waste of oil that becomes an environmental issue, right? So deductive thinking, I was talking about, proves that something must be the case. Inductive shows that something is an operation, and abductive, we are taking these leaps to connect information that's more or less incomplete. And you actually really have to take some sort of leap of faith in the sense of doing it. But you don't do it out of nowhere. You do it based on somewhat the pre-research that you really know you do to frame the situation. So really try to understand the context before you start moving forward and creating these possible analogies that help frame, let's say, the how or the operational modus that will lead to the value. So you can actually think on what is it that you have to do to achieve this outcome. And then you think about what the hell does it have to do with businesses? And it has to do a lot because this is how organizations can actually innovate. So Roger Martin, and this is a book that I strongly advise, and I forgot the name about it, but if you look for Roger Martin, let me just quickly Google it. Roger Martin, it is, oh boy, oh, The Design of Business. It's a very interesting book. So what he's talking about, okay, exploration is when I have an idea and I try to maximize it. And that's the very common mindset in organizations. We are essentially optimizing situations, like this quantitative mindset that has been embedded in business school forces us to really try to optimize and extract the maximum value of everything. And this is very important, don't get me wrong. The problem is that if you only extract value, like you milk your cow dead, more or less what Disney is doing with Star Wars, and then someone actually can come with an exploitation with is, how can we actually change this thing? And that's maybe what Mandalorian did, like it's not really going on the same narrative, but trying to go on your side and create something really new. So exploitation is about thinking about new possibilities, new businesses, in a sense, a little bit like the blue ocean strategy. We are trying to create new things. And this way of thinking, of design thinking, can really help organizations do this creative lift and create new solutions. So in the book, Martin talks about the example of McDonald's. And I'm not sure if you guys saw the movie, I think it's The Founder, where they're talking about the story of McDonald's. And it's a very interesting thing because they show like from the early stages, it's like two guys have this small shop, and then they kind of create some sort of unique value proposition that's very welcome by the market. But at some point, they really need to systematize it and to make it very efficient. So you can see there that they actually create this. They actually have these explorations. Sorry, actually, I just realized that I mixed the word exploration and exploitation. So reconsider everything that I said. Exploration is to find new things. Exploitation is to extract value. So they had to actually exploit new, explore new ideas to create, well, the value proposition, which is, well, there was a lot of those drive-in restaurants, but there was a lot of inconvenience. They reshaped this idea into something novel, and later they actually exploited it by really refining the systems that they had to make it super efficient. Another example is Swifer. You know, Procter & Gamble was one of those companies to really adopt design thinking early. And what happened is that, let's say, think about you are working in Procter & Gamble, which is this like gigantic organization, and then you are in this cleaning the house segment. And you know, like you see nail, you hammer it, right? You see dirty floor, you create a detergent for it. And that's what people are really doing, you know, like making the best detergent, improve the formula, making new combinations of formulas and whatever they could, until they actually took the, let's say, step back and say, okay, but what is it that people are trying to do here? You know, they're not trying to get the best detergent, they're actually trying to clean the house. And that's how they came up with this Swifer. So they actually, essentially, they reframed the problem. And what is it that people are trying to achieve? They changed the value. Another interesting example was the case of this company. They sold condos, you know, like these kind of smaller apartments for retired people in the south of the US, especially. And what happened is that they noticed that a lot of people were interested, but not really in it. Then they did the research to try to understand what the hell is going on here. And then they realized that one of the problems they had is the table. You know, like this big table that people have in the living room, and it has a lot of emotional value for people because, you know, if you have this table for 20, 30 years, sometimes it's even more because it's a family thing. And there is a lot of things happening around the table, you know, like the dinner table, you're talking with your family. So everything is around this, and people didn't really want to throw away this table. As they explore the situation, okay, we can actually make the living room a little bit bigger to fit the table, but very often people want actually to give this table for someone else in the family. And what they did is they added, besides expanding the living room area, they added 2 years of storage space for free. And because they realized that their business was not really only selling apartments, but they were in the business of moving lives, helping people transition from one type of life to another type of life. And in doing that, they became actually quite successful. And now we go to this more modern view of design thinking. That is, well, it came from, essentially, Tim Brown really helped push it, and IDEO, I guess all of you already heard of it. So it's a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkits to integrate the needs of people, possibilities of technology, and requirements for business success. Simply, you can think about this. We want people to want it. We want it to be feasible technologically. It's pointless to say, well, I have this super cool idea. I want to create these floating hoverboards. Well, we don't have technology for that, sadly. And viability, it has to be able to create enough money for the companies. Right now, I teach in an industrial design engineering program, and we see a lot of interest in desirability, secondary interest in feasibility, very little in viability. Viability is very often forgotten, and designers forget that they actually have to bring money. They are not artists. You are making this for someone, and the people have a reason. You know, it's not because companies are so nice and they are so loving that they actually care about customer experience. People care about customer experience because it brings money, and there is no other reason really. So you really have to consider these three aspects, and that's what they're really good in. And they say, okay, it really goes in cycles of divergence and convergence. So you create choices and you reduce these choices to make a decision. One of the most common design thinking frameworks is the one from the UK Design Council, which is the double diamond, where you kind of think of, you explore the situation, and then you try to converge by defining what the actual problem is, and then you create ideas, and then you condense to finding a solution. So the first stage is really exploration, which is, let's say, framing the problem, as we were talking earlier, understanding if you are handling, let's say, a cause or consequence of the situation, or are we handling the actual problem that we must address. And finding the problem that we are trying to address is a big part of the design process, and sometimes the biggest part, really. And the second one is to actually come up with the solution. Then we, of course, have the third, the triple diamond, right? Because then they put, oh, but we really have to think about implementation. And then you have as many variations as there are companies talking about the topic, because everyone wants to have their own proprietary model. In this context, we had service design. So a lot of these developments we see these days is in service design, design thinking, and then business design kind of emerged somewhere in the middle. And then, of course, you have UX design. And then, well, okay, what is it that's going on here, right? So well, very often you have a service design in the front end of the project, handling to a UX designer the project that will then later be handled to a developer. So service design, if you think about it, it started really as the design of services. It's like, oh, you did a PhD in service design. What is service design? It's like, well, what's product design? Well, design of products, design of services, right? The problem here is that the service is a very indeterminate object. I don't really design an object, a service, but I design the idea of the service in this idea. I'm thinking about how these the experiences that happen across the touch points, right? And using this design process and skills in a creative way to think about innovative services. But this is actually a concept, because a service happens in the interaction. At this level, you're thinking about a concept. This concept has still to be translated into touch point and artifacts that are implemented that facilitate the actual interactions that will take place later. This is a very nice definition of service design. Might be a little bit out of date, because as you'll see soon, service design evolved. But it's a human-centered approach that focuses the customer experience in the business, really trying to create a quality customer experience and seamless delivery, helps organizations see the end-to-end, surface-to-core perspective. And this is very important, because organizations have this often narrow perspective of seeing, we have a problem in the onboarding process, let's fix the onboarding process. Sometimes the onboarding process problems are just a symptom of something else. So we actually want to see the holistic perspective. And you want to see this from the user perspective, the customer perspective. It can be internal customer or an external customer, but it's still from the beneficiary point of view. It's rooted in design thinking, human-centered processes, the improvement, new service design, nothing new here. Collaborative methods that engage both customers and the organization, service delivery teams and the organization. You really have to go across silos to actually be able to create some change. You're really trying to understand this end-to-end experience, and it is seldom the case that it's only one department handling it. So you really need the corporation to really collaborate. And that's why we end up with this thing of having, well, oh, there is corporate design, there is business design, there is then it becomes this very confusing situation. Essentially, it is about thinking holistically about the customer experience, and we are trying to achieve a goal. What is the experience that we want to create? Focus on the user. It is co-creative in a sense that you will involve multiple stakeholders, and thus integrative. You use visual tools to facilitate it, because handling a lot of intangible concepts, it makes it easier if you have, for example, Lego or drawings or Post-its. and it's iterative, meaning that you will do something and very often you will have to repeat it to improve, a little bit like a sequence of sprints or agile development, but before development, still in the conceptualization stages. Then what happened is that service design was going very well, let's say financially for the consultancies, but it had a small problem, which was implementation. And that also goes for design thinking, because for some reason, service design grew as service design in Europe, and service design grew as design thinking in the US. And essentially, they are doing the same thing, right? When you apply in the organization, and most organizations applying it are service companies, and even you have service designers working for product making, like for Thermomix was designed with the help of LiveWork, which is a service design agency. And it has to do with this idea that we don't see services as non-products, but as a perspective of value creation, right? So if you think about, I don't know, this telephone here is the outcome of a sequence of services that people did. Think about the person that is in Brazil or Australia mining stuff, the people in the ship taking it somewhere else, the people melting these metals, the people assembling all these things, the software coders, the factory works. All of these people are doing a service. They are actually selling their service, which is essentially work, right? And then these services kind of how, well, embedded or integrated into this device. But what happens with this device is that it has no value whatsoever other than the value it gives me when I use it. It's like a washing machine. I think a washing machine is just a big bulky thing in the corner of your house. The value of the washing machine is in providing you clean clothes. So the value is uniquely and phenomenologically determined by the beneficiary, because I might be a dirty little prick and I don't like washing my clothes. I don't care about a washing machine. Or I'm very perfectionist and I need to have it in a dry cleaner. So the value is defined by me and I will choose the one that's better for me. And I'm integrating resources because the company integrated all these resources for me, right? They bring me the washing machine here, but I always have to know how to use it. And I always had all these resources that made me be possible to exchange, let's say, my resources, which are mediated essentially by money, with this other one that's the washing machine. So we are essentially integrating resources to create value for me in a sense, but the company extracts value this, of course, financially. Multiple actors are involved, as I said, like multiple people in the chain. And there are institutions facilitating this. A simple one is the government helping to do this, taking care of the roads through which is transported, the financial systems that are helping to make it to the transactions for buying and selling thing. And other institutions can be about the norms, right? We kind of have an idea about how it works. So it also makes it easier for us to operate. Some of the norms are about social values. Let's say in the Western world, we expect people, not to smell too much. Actually, I think all around the world, we have a certain regards for hygiene. But like say, I see that we have a lot of Brazilians here, and I think Brazilians are a little bit too obsessed with washing things, as I would say that Europeans take a little bit more a relaxed approach to it. And let's not go on those details, but these institutions also shape how we do, saying that the institutions are not only about the structural institutions like governmental institutions, but also the social institutions that are kind of relaxed and exist in between the, let's say, between the lines. So essentially, we move on this idea of designing a service. So the service is a concept, but we are designing for a service. We are integrating and coordinating the resources that will facilitate the service interactions, right? So think about a hairdresser. I want to create rock and roll hairdresser, kind of hipster. So I think about the concept of how it is, but then I have to actually buy the chair, rent the room, paint the place, buy the speakers for the cool music, have a small bar with craft beer in the corner. In doing this, I'm integrating the resources that will enable the service to take place. And the service and the value creation only takes place in the interaction between the user and the provider. Let's say when I go there and have my hair being cut, and of course I keep extracting value as I look myself in the mirror and I think, oh my God, gorgeous hair. The service logic helped a lot design thinking, service design, sorry, and really mixed service design with design thinking in a sense that design thinking never said it was for product or for service or for organization. And then services, because of this logic of value creation, right? We are designing the enablers of value creation. Then they actually get a possibility of kind of go everywhere. So this is a typical design process, design thinking process. This is from Norman Nielsen group. You start by empathizing with people, define the problem, ideate solutions, prototype solutions, test, implement. You have usually stages of understanding, exploring, materializing. This is very repetitive. Again, you're going to find as many variations as that as you look for. The one that I'm actually working, I actually starting a course soon. So we are really trying to focus on like 6 stages, which is really about understanding. Actually, there is one more. Yeah, sorry. So 7 stages. One is really about understanding the context, right? So trying to frame what is the situation. And there is this thing called the PASTEL framework, which is a way of understanding macro, how can I say, macro perspectives. So let me just read it because I never remember all the aspects of PASTEL. But it actually is, each word means something, which is political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal aspects. So it does actually say PASTEL. And because of actually environmental, now they call it PASTEL. But it gives you a general perspective of the context before you can actually start going forward. And I think this is very important because we want to ensure viability. And if we don't understand the context, if we don't understand what's going on, we will never really be capable of really coming up with a solution that fits in society other than by intuition. Empathize, you can go with, let's say, quasi-ethnographic, but small-scale research. You're really trying to understand the user. You have a lot of data already from marketing that has qualitative and quantitative research, mostly quantitative. But what you're really trying to do is this quasi-ethnographic, really talk with a few people, but understanding, maybe talking with extreme users. And then you can start defining what the problem is. What is it that you want to explore? And that's why the can also help shape the situation, because then you can actually understand the society on which this problem is embedded. Create as many ideas, right? You want really to expand and have multiple ideas, and then you want to prototype. And this prototypation has the use of actually facilitating communication, so you can actually go back and improve it and go forward, but also a very early stage test. This idea of fail early and fail cheap, right? After that, you actually have to test it, user experience, then you can see how much people like it. And I think it's a good opportunity to check for viability as early in the test process and not wait to throw things in the market to see how it bloomed. Didn't work. There is a case that I really like, which was people had a stereo, and they designed this very cool stereo, like it was like 20 years ago. And then it was black and blue one, and then they had this yellow and orange. And they were having a focus group and having discussions, and everybody like, my God, this yellow and orange one, bloody amazing, I love it, totally would buy. And then, okay, they closed the session and say, as a thank you, we bought a bunch of stereos in the exit, so just please choose one, and well, it's yours. And then, of course, everybody took the black and blue one. Because sometimes the ideas are very nice, but reality often tends to disagree. And of course, you have later to develop what is it that you created and try to grow. There's agile methodology to help you develop it. And growth hacking, although I am ethically a little bit against growth hacking because it's a little bit, well, Western approach, which is like, we'll do whatever it takes to grow. So yeah, do it with moderation. And remember, implementation always has its own challenges. It's not so easy. Things are easier said than done. It also is true for designing. Then what happened is that we can use design thinking in design research, but let's say this way, don't run too fast to conclusions. So the whole idea of design research, not thinking, research, is to extract reliable knowledge from either natural or artificial world and to make that knowledge available in reusable form. The thing is that design research has its own modus of operation. You are trying to create new things, and through creating new things, create new knowledge. Although design and research share similarities, there must be a distinction between them, right? So to qualify as research, there must be a reflection on the practitioner of work. It must be communicable in some sort of reusable results and available for reflection. People has to be able to, let's say, validate, peer check your work. The idea is that, and that's actually what I did in my PhD, and that's actually what I very often tell my master's students, not so much bachelor, it can be a bit complicated for bachelors, but my master's students usually do it, which is research through design. Which essentially, the idea is that in creating something, I will develop the knowledge of something else. So I wanted to understand in my PhD, how can I facilitate the development of brand-based customer experiences? And I created a brand experience manual as a tool to facilitate this. The brand experience manual is the artifact that I generated, but in generating this artifact, I was able to create new knowledge that led to the understanding of how I could do that. And if you have, how can service design do something? You cannot really answer this sort of question with qualitative or quantitative methodologies, because quantitative methodologies essentially trying to validate something or trying to see like, well, does this scale, how does the analysis, this cluster analysis go on, and how can we actually understand what is already there? You might be able somehow to extract this through qualitative research, because it does let you explore more emerging topics. But if no one is doing it, you're still not capable of doing it. What design research does for you, it actually lets you create something new as a way of understanding what is being done. This is sort of what people do in engineering or like technological research, but we don't really have the tools, let's say, to do this in businesses, or like this intersection between business and design, thinking about value co-creating solutions. I have a student that thought, how can we help this company become more proactive innovators? Again, he created a framework that helped him understand how the company could move forward, and in doing that, he actually developed an understanding on how companies can actually be more proactive. Not only this company, but in a general sense. Gibbons proposed the mode 2 of knowledge production, which is the idea that we should not build knowledge in practice. And I had once a discussion with a colleague in my PhD, which was essentially her perspective is that a PhD should not be that applied, at least not in design and architecture, which is I'm absolutely against. Faumann makes very clear distinction between design-oriented research and research-oriented design. They are not the same. The research-oriented design, you are creating an artifact. So in that sense of my research, the brand experience manual would be the outcome. But I did design-oriented research where the brand experience manual is just an artifact that happened to be the outcome of this research that I created. My objective was to understand the phenomenon, and I could only do this by designing this thing. And it's interesting because very often people talk about research for design and they create an object as a way of understanding, let's say, a situal circumstance. So how does, let's say, some interaction happen, so they can create an artifact, like a physical artifact that will actually change this interaction, and in doing that, they actually understand the phenomena. But if we are talking about creating a process, what very often happens is that you have this structure which is the finding, and the, let's say, the content around this structure is the artifact that you produced. So you actually really have to be capable of separating what is artifact and what's knowledge in what you created. In my case, the brand experience manual, if I remove the content of it, I can actually see the structure that facilitates the communication, which was actually using a metaphor of a relationship. Design thinking in design research. So a practice-based approach that aims at developing new knowledge in the context of application, in which the design projects are not only the object study, but integral part of research. So I wouldn't say it's not only design thinking, it's really about design research. But what happened is that if you're going to a company and you're trying to understand how can we type of question, you can really benefit from design thinking in enabling this process, right? You really need to ensure that it's research, like it's not like I did design thinking, it's research. No, you need to have some substantial text, and you have to have some sort of academic communicable material that ensures that this material, that what you did, it has quality. It has to be passive of validation. There are actually quite some criteria that you can use to ensure that your work is good, but you can really use this approach not as a methodology of research, but to help your methodology by adopting a design, a practice-based design research methodology, which I think is what I wanted to say here, and I just kind of repeated myself. No, actually, yeah. So this is just a reminder. Design thinking is not a research methodology, but it can help organizations innovate, and in doing that, it can help address these how can we type of questions. So it can really help you lead the practice in this practice-based design research methodology. So yeah, that was kind of the last message, because I want to be sure that people don't think, oh, I'm doing design thinking and it is my methodology. Sometimes it can really look alike, and sometimes it's really tangled. My master students often have a lot of trouble untangling what is design process and what is research process, because they really mix. But it's important that you understand that these are two things that they run in parallel, and you cannot let this mix get too blurry at the risk of compromising either the research of the design process, and often the research process is the one that pays the price, and you lose quality, and that's what you really don't want to do, especially in a PhD. And that was it for today. Thank you very much. But I think we will later circulate. So there is my email here. You can contact me if you have any questions. Of course, now we have some time for discussion. And yeah.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Mauricy, and it was really important for us, particularly this last message about the interaction between design thinking and design research. I think it clarifies a lot our thoughts and the way that we are approaching design thinking.